Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in our teleconference today. We are going to be meeting the Oracles of Delphi and learning about the tradition that existed in Greece for almost 2,000 years. Now, let's meet the Oracles of Delphi. What if you could communicate with the divine, or God, or the universal spirit? If you could ask a representative of the divine, a channel, a question, what would that question be? But wait, don't answer yet, because you only get to ask one question in your lifetime. So let's give this some thought. Today we're talking about the oracles of ancient Delphi. An oracle is a person or even a thing considered to provide insight, wise counsel, or prophetic predictions, often including foreseeing the future. And it is sometimes thought to be inspired by a deity. Some oracles were thought to be portals through which the deities themselves spoke directly to people. Delphi is in central Greece. It overlooks the beautiful Sea of Corinth. The oracles at Delphi were chosen from the women of that area. In the early years, they were young women. And then in later years, they were more mature and learned. And eventually, they were women of high social standing, cultivated, and discerning. Around 440 BCE, an Athenian potter decorated this large cup with a scene of the Delphic oracle during her prophecy. This is the only surviving depiction of the oracle from her own era. The artist presents a mature woman, poised and graceful, dressed in a long robe that falls to her ankles. And again, this was created in 440 BCE, so during the time of this tradition. She is sitting on a tripod with her bare feet suspended above the ground. Her posture is relaxed and slightly withdrawn, as if in a trance. Her gaze is lowered toward a small bowl, likely filled with sacred water, while she holds a sprig of laurel, which was sacred to the god Apollo. The chamber she is in has a low ceiling, and beneath her, the artist suggests that there is a mysterious void below the floor. There have been oracles around the world for thousands of years, and some still exist today. There were several oracular centers around Greece. However, the oracles of Delphi were the most famous and most important. For thousands of years, kings, generals, philosophers, and common people consulted the oracles of Delphi before making any major decisions. Let that sink in for a moment. For thousands of years, any major decision was presented to these women in Delphi for advice. At that time in Greece, women basically had the same rights as slaves, meaning no rights. However, these women, the oracles of Delphi, shaped political decisions, liberated slaves, gave moral guidance to common people and the rulers of the time, and reflected on the psychological and social tensions of the Greek world. They were foundational in the cultural and religious life of ancient Greece, whose citizens and rulers valued and depended on their authority. This image shows King Aegis, one of the kings of Athens and for whom the Aegean Sea is named, receiving guidance from the oracle. Inquirers were required to purify themselves before approaching her, and they were only allowed to ask one question in their lifetime. How did this happen? How did these women become so powerful and influential? Her perceived accuracy was certainly a factor, as was her antiquity. There were oracles at Delphi beginning in at least 1600 BCE. But way before then, in the most ancient times, the people around Delphi were connected with nature and with the Earth Mother. Gaia, the Earth Mother goddess, was worshipped here for thousands of years. Her son, Pythos, a massive serpent, ruled Mount Parnassus that you see here, and was the protector of the oracles at Delphi. Delphi means womb, womb in Greek. It was considered the navel of the world, the center. Our closest connection with our mothers was through our navel. So this meaning has broad implications, including connecting us with the Earth Mother. It was a meeting point between our world and the spiritual world, between humans and the divine. Ancient accounts of Delphi's origins describe a crack in the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where goats would start bleating wildly and jumping in a frenzied state once they got near this crack in the slopes of this mountain. Herders would see this happen with their goats, and when they got close, they too experienced similar effects. Both animals and humans seemed overtaken, as if possessed. Some herders reported vivid visions, while others found themselves predicting future events. Ancient reports stated that women seemed to have a greater ability for this. The oracles were chosen for their natural ability. At first, they sat on a craggy rock, which is still in the complex of Delphi, near where fumes were believed to rise from the earth. It's a little hard to see, but in this next image, I put a green outline around this craggy rock so you can see this is the oracles would sit atop this rock and share their guidance. In the 8th century BCE, invaders came from the north with their deity Apollo, the sun god. Mythology says that Apollo killed the serpent guardian, Pythos, establishing Olympian domination over this sacred site. The sun god now dominated the Earth Mother. This ancient jug shows Apollo and Hercules fighting over the oracle's tripod. Remember, she would sit on top of this tripod when presenting her oracles. Eventually, Delphi became an enormously powerful center with athletic games like the Olympics every 4 years. They had pools, gyms, music festivals, and a theater for thousands of people. This is a model showing what it would have looked like in ancient times. So a person would enter from the lower right, and these arrows show the switchbacks. And down at the bottom, those little buildings, those were treasuries that were filled with gifts, thanking the oracle for her guidance that allowed them to be successful. So you follow the arrows, and then eventually you go up to the top, and that is the Temple of Apollo. That is where you would enter the Temple of Apollo. The two red arrows show the arrow pointing down shows that craggy rock where the gases first came out, and the oracles would sit on top of the rock and give their prophecies. And the red arrow going to the left shows where the oracle sat in the temple of Apollo. And here too, gas came up through the ground into the area where she sat. In their history of the Delphic oracles, H.W. Park and D.E.W. Warmel wrote that the sanctuary had a guild of mature women whose main responsibility was to keep the eternal fire burning in the temple's central hearth. Like the oracles, these women had to have led a pure life and to have ceased from marital relationships. This guild, the scholars suggest, provided a natural recruiting ground for the oracular post. So here you see what the Temple of Apollo looks like today. It's up on the side of Mount Parnassus. And to the arrow, the green arrow on the left, that's where you would enter. That is the portal into the Temple of Apollo. And the red arrow on the right shows where the oracle was seated. And as I'll explain in more detail later, this is right above where the gases come up out of the ground that can produce a trance-like state. The women who served as oracles at Delphi were also called sibyls or pythias. It's all the same. The same person would be called an oracle, a sibyl, or a pythia. And the prophecies that they gave were also called oracles. This is a painting by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, and this shows the Oracle of Delphi. Some of the oracle's advice was about whether to wage war, how long a ruler would reign, should the king colonize another country, big questions like that. There were also very personal questions about life decisions. For example, should I marry this person? Questions about personal dilemmas. The oracles disdained pompousness and respected modest people. One man asked, and remember, you only get one question. One man said, "How can I be rich?" And the oracle responded, "You can buy all the land between here and Sparta." And then she was done with him. She also had a very low tolerance for questions where someone could just do what it is they were requesting on their own. And the oracle's responses were often ambiguous. As I said, the oracles respected modest people. The oracles declared that taking the life of a slave, which until then was not a crime, was no different from murder and required purification, unless the killing was by accident. The oracles invoked Apollo's authority to liberate thousands of enslaved people. Today at Delphi, you can see scratched on the foundations of some of the buildings inscriptions and plaques recording thanks for the formal granting of freedom to those people who were once enslaved. This is the type of power the oracles had. The oracle's responses were often ambiguous, requiring the questioner to participate in the response. Many Greek cities asked how to stop the Persian invasion. Two responses were, "A wall of wood alone shall be uncaptured, a boon to you and your children." And then the second part, "Pray to the winds, they will prove to be mighty allies of Greece." The wall of wood was interpreted as the fleet of Greek ships, which battled the Persians to a standstill at Cape Artemisium and later defeated the Persians at Salamis. This was an epic battle, and it was because of the superiority of the Greek ships that they won this battle. Also, a torrential storm battered the ships of the Persians for 3 days at Cape Artemisium before the Battle of Salamis, destroying 20% of their fleet. So again, the oracle had said, "Pray to the winds. They will prove to be mighty allies of Greece." Sometimes the questioners interpreted the response incorrectly. The most famous example was Croesus, the king of Lydia, which today is in Turkey. You may have heard of Croesus. There's still a saying that you can say someone was as rich as Croesus. He had so many things going for him, and he wanted to attack the Persians. So he sent representatives to several of the oracles in ancient Greece. Remember, they weren't just in Delphi, there were other oracular centers. And his messengers asked these oracles what Croesus was doing at that time. And two of them got it right, including the oracle at Delphi. And she said that she smelled a boiling tortoise in a bronze pot, or she smelled a boiling tortoise who was in a bronze pot with a lamb, and the pot had a bronze lid. And that's exactly what Croesus was doing at that time. This was a test. Now, that would have been pretty hard to guess. Then he sent someone back and asked if Croesus should march against the Persians. The oracle responded, "If you cross the Halys River, which was the border with the Persians at that time, you will destroy a great empire." Croesus interpreted this as a sign to attack. When he does attack the Persians, he is defeated, captured, and his empire is destroyed. He was the last king of Lydia. Afterwards, messengers asked the oracle about her prediction, and she said Croesus should have sent another messenger to ask the second question, which of course was, which empire? The oracles helped people to expand their perspective. They didn't present certainty. Epictetus, who was the Stoic philosopher, said, "Don't come to the oracle with preconceptions. Everything is marked as a good omen, if only I want it." Croesus wanted to attack the Persians, so he did, causing his downfall. He came with his preconception. Have you ever done that? Have you ever looked for a sign supporting the thing you wanted to do so you could do it? The oracles, even in the earliest times, appear to have experienced a shift in consciousness. Ancient historians reported the oracles would sit on a tripod over an opening in the ground with fumes coming out of it, and they would go into a trance. A paper in the latest issue of the Rose-Croix Journal, which is the order's peer-reviewed transdisciplinary journal, explores some possible causes of this shift in consciousness. It may have been from inhaling fumes that came up through those cracks in the ground. Researchers have found evidence that ethylene, a natural gas that can cause euphoric trance-like states without losing consciousness, may have been in the area exactly where the oracles sat. And remember, the earlier oracles sat on a rock near where the gases came out of the ground. Perhaps the change of state came from The oracles ingesting psychoactive substances. There's a lot of evidence today that the Greeks used mushrooms and other substances to reach other states of awareness, especially during their rituals. There are many possible causes to this change of state of consciousness with the oracles, which this paper in the Rose Quad Journal explores. In any case, something was definitely happening there. William J. Broad, in his book, The Oracle, writes, quote, "A few analysts hold that the oracle's more spectacular predictions support the findings of psychic research and confirm the existence of a realm of natural law beyond the current understandings of science." End quote. The oracles had an expanded perspective. How could they know that Croesus was boiling the tortoise and lamb in a bronze pot? The oracles moved beyond literal thinking and a personal or ego-centered view into symbolic awareness, multiple possibilities, and recognition of deep patterns. A close friend of mine has an extraordinary ability to see patterns in situations that are sometimes invisible to me and to other people. In psychological tests, a person like this is called a mastermind. It's just how my friend sees things and connects them. She notices patterns. She views things from a higher level. Perhaps this was just how these women's minds worked, and they were valued for it. And the psychoactive substances may have subdued their more rational mind, granting the freeing of the subconscious. The oracles often responded with ambiguous answers, which forces the questioner to reflect. It gives the questioner responsibility. I have to figure it out. And it expands the questioner's awareness. Perception is influenced by our personal lens, by our biases, whether we're aware of them or not. Perception is influenced by what I want to hear, what I am open to hearing. Perception is also influenced by our cultural lens, our shared meanings and myths, things that we as a society agree on. And perception is influenced when we have an expanded lens, the oracle consciousness that sees wider patterns beyond just the self. Non-linear insight, a mastermind's view. The questions we ask say a lot about us and determine the answers. For example, at Rosicrucian Park, we use Appreciative Inquiry for our strategic planning. This is a method. It's a strengths-based positive approach to organizational change and development that focuses on what is working well rather than fixing problems. An example of this at your museum, the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum, when we ask a guest with a questionnaire, what did you like, what did you not like? When we ask them questions, we don't ask those questions. We ask them things that tap into what they want more of. Like, tell us about the most inspiring experience you have ever had at a museum. Or when we did this in the past with some affiliated bodies, tell us about your most inspiring experience at any Rosicrucian affiliated body. And then we provide more of that. We build on that. So we focus on what we want more of, not problem solving. The questions determine the answers. If you ask questions, what didn't you like? That determines the answers you're going to get. If you ask questions, tell us what inspires you, those are the answers you're going to get. Let's brainstorm for a few moments, preparing for the question you would like to ask the divine, or its channel, or your master within, the oracle. Don't come up with your question yet. Before you decide on your one question, let's practice something. Above the portal of the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece was the injunction, know thyself. This is ever the purpose of each Rosicrucian. For the next minute, please post questions related to the phrase, know thyself. We're going to open the chat, and you can post your questions. If you're exploring the topic, don't answer the question. Don't explain where your question came from. We're just going to brainstorm for 1 minute so that we can approach this subject from various angles. For example, well, here we have one already. Who am I? Let me go to the chat here. Which self am I to know? How can I better serve humanity? Eternal, what do I need to know now? What is my purpose? What is God calling me to do? What is my true purpose on earth? What is my purpose? Keep posting in the chat. Who am I past the material? What is my purpose here in the grand scheme of things? Why am I here? Am I practicing what is best for me and those around me? What will my ultimate impact on humanity be? I am here to love. Am I doing that? How can I better serve humanity? How do I embrace myself? This is going very fast, so I'm catching this as quickly as I can. What is my nature? How can I bring peace on earth? Am I really evolving, or am I deluding myself? Am I better to migrate or stay in the same place? What is the purpose of life? How do I use what I know? How do I avoid thinking about and why? What do I avoid thinking about and why? Will chanting vowel sounds bring me closer to my purpose? How can I use myself to make life better for all? How do I hear my inner voice? What is this life about? How can I have optimal health? What was my most inspiring experience of self? Good job, way to apply that. Am I doing what the cosmic desires and appreciates? Will you help me recognize my shadow? How do I connect to 100%, full 100% range? We'll do a few more. Again, this is coming fast. Was I or am I an oracle at Delphi? What is my purpose in this planet? Am I being a proper service to humanity and the divine? Am I on the path and mission you brought me back to here? How do I lessen the burden? How to expand the divine? Am I in the cosmic intelligence? Is the universe aware of itself? What is the difference between know thyself and I am? What is the most important thing I should know about myself? Am I on the right path to my purpose? What is the way to find self? Why did I come here? So, thank you all so much for giving so much of yourself to this question. So this is not going to be your question for our exercise that we're going to do in a minute. This is just brainstorming, and then the next step is to decide how can I fine tune that for my one question to the divine, but we're not there yet. So again, thank you all so much for posting your questions. And when we do this, again, we don't answer the questions. We're just throwing out as many ideas that come about what is it I really want to know? What guidance, what advice am I really seeking here? Remembering that the questions we ask determine the answers we get. So we need to start with the right question. Next, we'll explore how to communicate our question. The Rosicrucian Order published an audio recording called Two Practical Principles by Erwin Watermeyer, who was an RCUI instructor for many years. And we have this available. It's both a recording, we made it into an article in the Rosicrucian Digest. Here is a summary. These important principles are, and this is how to communicate with our subconscious, how to communicate with the divine. These important principles are, these two practical principles, the only events of which we may become objectively aware are impressions received in terms of the five objective senses. You know, seeing, hearing, smelling, like the oracle smelled the the tortoise that was boiling. Consequently, before any psychic or non-material impression may be objectively realized, before we can be aware of anything that is on that other level, it must first transform itself into an objective sense impression, into something we can smell or see or hear or taste or touch. Secondly, our subconscious speaks and understands only the language of symbols. Consequently, when one desires to impress anything upon the subconscious, it must first be translated or transposed into a symbol or image. And this is not what we're doing right now, but you know, when we do a visualization, a Rosicrucian visualization technique, we don't think of, like, let's say we we look at its manifestation. We don't look at words about it. We don't think, okay, I want this much money. We see it in our minds. We see the images. We see the symbols of what it is we want to manifest. Now, that's not what we're doing now, but that's related to this. So again, when one desires to impress anything upon the subconscious, it must first be translated or transposed into a symbol or image. These principles work most efficiently in what Rosicrucians call the borderline state, which maybe we can consider that was the oracle state. The subjective or borderline state is when our objective faculties are momentarily suspended or inactive, which is often right before we fall asleep, or when the oracles prepared themselves. They purified themselves, they went to the sacred spring and drank the water and put the water on themselves for purification. They fasted. It was a formal ritualistic setting. Their society valued their gifts. All of this contributed to their powers. Or we can practice certain breathing techniques that help to bring us to the borderline state. You know what this state is. Right before you fall asleep, you're not quite aware, you're not asleep yet. It's that state, which you may have experienced as part of meditation or using certain breathing techniques. It is the mental state during which the objective and subjective consciousness are partially subdued so that the subconscious may rise in power. So these are techniques to clear the way for communication with and from our subconscious. We can tap into more than our usual way of perceiving. Okay. Now think of the question you want an answer to, something you want guidance on. Maybe it's related to health or finance or a relationship. For the next minute, think of one question after another you could ask about this until you feel you have clarity about what you want to know or experience. So, right now is brainstorming, just like we did with Know Thyself. Brainstorm different approaches to what it is you would want to ask the divine. So we'll pause while you do that. Okay. So you have prepared what you want to ask of the divine, of your subconscious. The real function of the oracle is not prediction, but an expansion of our awareness and perception, alignment with the direction we want to go, alignment with what's best for us, and clarity. The future is shaped by how we interpret the present. Now we're going to practice our meditation. Please close your eyes, sit comfortably, take 3 deep breaths, becoming more relaxed with each exhalation. Now, imagine that you are about to enter the sacred precinct of Delphi. You stop to wash your hands and face and drink water from the nearby sacred spring. You turn and silently and reverently walk up the stone path. You arrive at the sacred place, ancient, quiet. Now you see a craggy rock. You reverently climb up and sit on this rock. With your spine straight and your eyes closed, you focus on your breath, moving closer to the veil that separates this world from the spirit world. You experience a shift in consciousness. expanding your awareness beyond your usual five senses, experiencing other awareness. Now bring your question into your awareness. Not something you need to solve, but something you want to see differently, to see deeply. Ask your question, knowing the listener, your own master within. The oracle has access to what you seek to know and experience. Allow images, symbols, feelings, no need to interpret. Their meaning will be revealed to you. Notice what shifts and what expands. The oracle does not speak in words. She speaks in awareness. When you're ready, gently return. And open your eyes. What did the oracles teach us? Our questions reveal how we see the world and ourselves. And the answers can come in many forms. Insight requires participation. Do we still seek guidance from oracles today? Access to expanded perception? We can find it by going to the celestial sanctum and attuning with our master within. In the mundane world, People still seek guidance from the oracle through Google, through artificial intelligence, through data analysis leading to predictions, by consulting experts who see beyond what we know, by predictions of all types. The Oracles of Delphi remind us the deepest guidance doesn't tell us what will happen. It transforms how we see.